Time now for spinning my dad's vinyl. Here, with all his skips, scratches, and pops, is my dad, Frank Vaccarello.
Thanks, sweetie, and thank you for tuning into episode 251 of Spinning My Dad's Vinyl. Welcome back, and Merry Christmas Eve. My girlfriend Karen and I partook in a Northcoast Christmas season tradition a week and a half ago for the very first time. And of course, my dad had a record for that. It's not a vinyl record, but a shellac album set recorded nearly 100 years ago that probably belonged to my dad's dad. And it's filled with music from a U.S. holiday tradition. But if you've ever seen the ballet it's connected to, you'll notice plenty of music missing. I'll tell you why as we go along. In fact, this is going to be a lengthy dive into the difference between the suite and the dance. So, get ready to hear the most notable themes from a fairytale ballet as Stokowski conducts Tschaikowsky in Volume 251, a Cleveland Ballet Christmas Tradition. It's the Philadelphia Orchestra, conducted by Leopold Stokowski, performing the overture miniature and march from Peter Ilyich Tschaikowsky's Nutcracker Suite Opus 71A. What you heard was side 1 of this collection. The overture miniature is precisely what its name implies. In the orchestration with the theme and its elaborations preponderantly in the violins is interesting. It has an astonishing brilliance of tone quality, a penetrating sweetness and withal, a daintiness not at all marred by the very distinctly marked climaxes. The characteristic device of Tschaikowsky drawing of bright scales across the principal subjects is noted here as well as elsewhere in the suite. Underneath, and again above the chief motif, flying notes flutter like wings. The flute spurts a glittering rivulet of time that flashes as in sunlight over the dainty, almost Mozartian theme, and too soon the quick chords, pizzicati, joined with the soft clangs of the celesta, end the overture. And then the march. Hardly has the last note of the overture sounded when the bright brasses intone the pompous little phrase that opens the first of the characteristic dances. Horns and trumpets, later with the clarinet, give forth this brave sentence, and presently the somber basses come to life in hurrying scales plucked from their deep-voiced strings. Crashing cymbals emphasize the bold cadence of the march. More sonorous brass takes it up again, and in a final rush of tone, the march rises to a swift, vigorous climax at the end. Now, that text I just read is from the program notes from inside the album, and I will read them as introductions from here on out. Okay, why this record set for this episode? Because it's Christmas Eve, and we've long wanted to see the Cleveland Ballet perform the Nutcracker. I thought it was the perfect nostalgic record to celebrate the two. And in case you didn't notice, this is a 12-inch, 78 RPM shellac record set. Very brittle, as I'll explain later. Now, I had heard all of the music from this record collection numerous times over the years. I had to play it on several radio stations during the month of December. But I had never seen nor really knew the story of the Nutcracker and how it began its life as music composed specifically for a ballet. Now, we've had plenty of family and friends who have seen the Cleveland production, and they always come back excited from this performance. Now, the story notes from inside the album also call out the story of the Nutcracker. A little poor girl dreamed on Christmas night her queer, hopelessly unromantic gift of an ordinary household nutcracker comes to life, commands the lead soldiers in battle against the Mouse King and his lively cohorts, who would have triumphed had not Claire slain their furry commander with her slipper, whereupon the Nutcracker becomes a handsome prince who flies with Claire to the fascinating domain of the Sugar Plum Fairy, somewhere in Araby, where toys and sweetmeats join in one great frolic to celebrate the romance of the little girl and her Prince Charming. Bottom line, as you'll find out, this album will only have a portion of the music you hear during the course of the ballet. So, if you were expecting to hear the grand pas de deux, you won't. Next up, this also is used in one of my favorite Disney movies, Fantasia. Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. Shortly before the completion of the Nutcracker Suite, Tschaikowsky heard for the first time in Paris the celesta, which had just been invented by Mustel. He was utterly fascinated by its lovely tone and lost no time in writing a special piece for it. Here we have that music. And it is interesting to note also that the first performance of the Nutcracker Suite was also the first occasion on which the celesta was used in the orchestra. It is not unfair to assume that the Sugar Plum Fairy was somewhat hampered in her movements by the gelatinous nature of her constitution. The rhythm is now somewhat lazy. The adhesive sweetness of the celesta is therefore probably the best possible instrument here. Tschaikowsky was too much the artist, however, to permit sweetness to become cloying. And since the fairy was, supposedly of the, so to speak, gentler sex, we find the characteristic and compensating acerbity in the tuneful snapping of plucked strings and short-lived soft blandishments in the mellow clarinet. And Russian dance. This is the most distinctly Russian music in the suite. Here are flying boots encasing feet that must be warmed. Here are the vigor, the naivete, the simple delight of the Russian peasant, all set to magnificent music. Here, for the first time, the full power of the orchestra is felt. A wild dance, mightily accented with tambourine and sounding drum. Fiercely vehement strings have the chief utterance. Trombones sound in mocking laughter. The pace quickens, and suddenly the full might of the orchestra is released in a thrilling climax. Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy and Russian Dance. Now let me tell you about my dad's shellac I am spinning for this episode. Peter Ilyich Tschaikowsky, the Philadelphia Orchestra conducted by Leopold Stokowski, Nutcracker Suite, Opus 71A. It's on the Victor Red Seal label, number DM265. It's part of the Musical Masterpiece series. It's a 3-shellac, 12-inch, 78 RPM album reissue, and it's the Camden pressing, I do believe. It was released in the 1940s, although I'm not sure of the exact release date of this version because there were many of them. But I do know it was recorded November 4th, 10th, and 18th, 1926 at the Academy of Music. Its genre is classical, its style is romantic ballet. Now we are listening to all 6 sides of this collection, which includes 8 songs. Now, I'll read some of the liner notes that we are not using elsewhere. Peter Ilyich Tschaikowsky lived from 1840 to 1893. The Russia he loved so passionately saw both the birth and the death of Tschaikowsky. The former was little noted. The latter will long be remembered and lamented. A young man of the world, sensitive, introspective, temperamental, Tschaikowsky turned to music as the fulfillment of his life only after he had weighed and found wanting the trivial pastimes of youth of his class and period. Now, I also want to focus more on Stokowski's arrangement, so I found this information. Nutcracker Suite Opus 71A, performed by the Philadelphia Orchestra and conducted by Leopold Stokowski in 1926, is one of the earliest and most influential recordings of Tschaikowsky's iconic ballet music. This suite, arranged from the Nutcracker Ballet, consists of 8 selected movements, capturing the whimsical charm and festive spirit of the original score. Now, let me lay out some historical context. Stokowski, known for his vibrant interpretations and orchestral innovations, brought a uniquely lush and dramatic style to Tschaikowsky's music. His 1926 recording with the Philadelphia Orchestra showcased the ensemble's warm strings, shimmering winds, and dynamic range, solidifying their reputation as one of the premier orchestras of the time. Now, my dad's record is in poor shape. In fact, the next record actually has a big chunk out of the edge, but through the magic of the internet, we won't miss any music. Now, there's lots of crackling on this, and some of the music is no longer as loud as it should be, but surprisingly, they are in pretty good shape. The cover is in fair condition, pretty solid. It just looks a little worn, but it is close to 80 years old. Now, because of the broken record, I don't think this album has much value, so I won't put one on it. Now, let's move on to the next country Clara visited in her dream. Exotic, languorous, dreamy, with the mystical dreams of the East is the Arab dance in the suite. Scored for muted strings and woodwind only, it is filled with the mellow richness inseparable from these instruments, yet it is not without poignancy. A drone bass is made the foundation of a fascinating rhythmic and harmonic structure with a languishing melody, in the lighter strings answered contrastingly by the woodwind. Furtive insinuations of the tambourine punctuate and point the rounded phrases. Bewitching fragments of melody sigh from the oboe, the cor anglais and the bass clarinet, and the dance drifts off into silence and nothingness. there you have the Arab dance. Now, we've talked about Tschaikowsky and Stokowski in previous episodes, so let's learn more about the music, sort of a bio of the Nutcracker, the concert suite versus the ballet. In 1890, the Imperial Theaters of St. Petersburg asked Tschaikowsky to write 2 stage works at once, an opera and a ballet. The ballet assignment already had a concept and a story attached. This was not music in search of dancers, it was music on deadline for dancers. The source was E.T.A. Hoffmann's darkly whimsical tale The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, softened and sweetened via Alexander Dumas's adaptation. Marius Petipa, the great choreographer, outlined the ballet in detail. He even specified things like tempo, mood, and length for certain numbers. Tschaikowsky was composing inside a very specific theatrical blueprint. When The Nutcracker premiered in 1892, the reaction was polite. The ballet itself puzzled audiences. Critics complained about the story, the heavy use of children, and the structure. The music, however, was instantly admired. Tschaikowsky even pulled sections out to create a concert suite which caught fire long before the fall ballet did. Tschaikowsky had already sensed this, and before the ballet even premiered, extracted 8 movements into what became the Nutcracker Suite Opus 71A. This suite was designed specifically for the concert hall. For decades, the Nutcracker was heard far more often without dancers than with them. The concert suite became popular almost immediately. The full ballet took roughly 50 years to catch up. By the early 20th century, the Nutcracker Suite was being played regularly by orchestras across Europe and America. Many cities had no regular ballet companies, but they did have symphony orchestras. So audiences knew the Sugar Plum Fairy, the Waltz of the Flowers, and the March as orchestral showpieces, not dance numbers. For a lot of listeners, Nutcracker was simply Tchaikovsky's colorful winter suite. The turning point wasn't musical. It was cultural. George Balanchine's Nutcracker in New York, 1944, then annual from 1954, reframed the ballet as a family tradition, a holiday ritual, an American season event. Only after that did the full ballet eclipse the suite in public consciousness. Before it was annual or anywhere, 1900s to 1930s, full productions of the Nutcracker were rare in the U.S. Most Americans knew the music from orchestral concerts, radio broadcasts, and recordings. And ballet companies were few, underfunded, and usually tied to major cities. Annual ballet traditions simply weren't a thing yet. Ballet was seen as elite, imported, and occasional. In this era, Nutcracker was a suite, not a seasonal event. So when the New York City Ballet performed it, the ballet was reframed as family-friendly, predictable on the calendar, repeatable year after year. Other companies noticed immediately. Now, this is the moment when Nutcracker stops being just repertoire and starts becoming ritual. It reaches out to other large cities and then community theater. At that point, Nutcracker is no longer a ballet company's choose to do, it's the one they feel compelled to do. And sometimes it's the only financially successful production which enables a theater to continue doing other works. So even though we have 6 records with 8 pieces from the ballet, what we are hearing was not attached to the dancing at all, but stood alone in concert halls, radio broadcasts, and recording studios. Okay, let's move on to a couple more dances. Chinese dance. Scratch a Russian and you find a Tartar. Sometimes we of the Western world do not fully realize the intimacy of the kinship between the Russian and the Mongolian. Geographically, they are actually neighbors, remembering the gigantic reaches of Russia, Siberia, and China. Ethnically, the relation is closer. It was apparently easy for Tschaikowsky to work in a pseudo-Chinese musical idiom, as the part of the ballet suite will disclose. The dance opens with droning bassoons, snapping notes plucked from the violins, and shrill, excited cries in the flute's keenest voice. Swift flights in the woodwind, crystalline flashes of the triangle, silvery showers from the glockenspiel, and always the droning comment of the bassoons underneath the growing tumult. The end comes quickly, on one brief chord. And Dance of the Flutes. A mirliton is something similar to our kazoo, a toy instrument, simple as a comb with tissue paper wrapped around it, with a tone quality much the same as is produced by the most eloquent instruments of the American schoolboy. The mirlitons were actually used in the ballet, but not in the concert arrangement of the suite. Flutes are, naturally, the most conspicuous instrument here. A little introduction indicating the rhythm of the dance, and then flutes appear in a figure of exquisite, fairy-like daintiness, not without a note of pensiveness, yet gay nevertheless. Contrasted with the delicate rhythm and the tone color is the more robust dance motif given the trumpets against a background of heavier brass, which presently is taken up by all the orchestra except the flutes. The fiesque flute dance of the opening comes again, more strongly supported now, rising to a very definite climax at the end. Chinese dance and Dance of the Flutes. Time now for this episode's interesting side note, and it has to do with a special instrument that Tschaikowsky discovered and Stokowski swore by. The famous celesta in Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy wasn't a happy accident. Tschaikowsky hunted down that sound because he needed something that felt weightless, magical, and precise enough to float on point shoes. The celesta is a small keyboard that strikes metal plates with felt hammers. It looks like a tiny upright piano and sounds like bells dipped in moonlight. Tschaikowsky discovered it in Paris in 1891 and guarded the secret, worried another composer might get to it first. He wrote the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy specifically around that sound. No celesta, no sugar plum magic. Did Stokowski use it? Why, yes. Stokowski was obsessed with orchestral color, and the Celesta was pure color. In his Philadelphia Orchestra performances and recordings of the Nutcracker Suite, he used a real Celesta, not a substitute like a glockenspiel or piano. Now, I'll give you a few details. By the 1920s to 30s, top American orchestras owned Celestas. Stokowski insisted on the real thing for authenticity. He often adjusted orchestral balance so the Celesta didn't just sparkle on top but floated inside the texture, cushioned by strings. And on 78 RPM recordings, delicate sounds could vanish. Stokowski compensated with careful placement and dynamics so the Celesta still registered as luminous rather than tinny. If you listen closely to Sugar Plum Fairy, the Celesta doesn't feel icy or percussive. It feels suspended, like light hanging in air. That's a Stokowski fingerprint. So, why does the use of this instrument matter? Early audiences often heard Nutcracker without ever seeing the ballet. For them, the Celesta was the fairy. Stokowski helped fix that association in the American ear decades before Nutcracker became a December stage ritual. So when you spin those shellacs, you're not hearing a workaround or compromise. You're hearing a conductor who understood that one small keyboard could carry an entire myth. The last featured song from the concert program was split into two sides because of its length. Remember, 78 RPM could only handle 3.5 minutes or so of music. Waltz of the Flowers. The final number of the suite is the garland of flowers that crowns it. In the universality of its appeal, in its intrinsic loveliness, it stands as one of Tschaikowsky's most felicitous utterances. Woodwinds delivers an introduction containing the seeds from which the chief waltz theme is developed. The harp glitters in a most gratifying cadenza. And then, in the horns, we find the captivating melody upon which the whole piece is founded. The brilliant strings have the contrasting subject and elaborations of both the first part of the waltz ending upon this secondary idea. Then a new melodic idea is introduced in the woodwind and sets another in contrast in the violin section. Ever the accompanying maintains the flowing waltz rhythm. The climax is reached in a majestic development of the original waltz theme of the horns, the phrases preceding the final tremendous chords being a rhythmic mutation of this subject. part one of Waltz of the Flowers. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. And I hope you have enjoyed this music as well over the years, whether you've seen the ballet or not. So I thought I would bring Karen in so we could do a quick performance review. Karen, what did you think of the Cleveland Ballet's performance of the Nutcracker?
I honestly wasn't sure what to expect. I knew the music, of course, but I'd never actually seen the full ballet before. By the end of it, though, I was completely won over. Right when the curtain opened, it felt like I'd stepped into a different world. The sets were way more detailed than I imagined they'd be, and each scene seemed to top the last. The costumes caught my attention right away, too. They were colorful and classic, but not distracting. And they helped make it clear who everyone was and where we were in the story. What surprised me most were the dancers. I knew ballet required skill, but seeing it live made me realize just how much control and strength it takes. Even without dialogue, it was easy to understand what was happening just by watching how they moved. The characters felt impressive, expressive, and human, not distant or formal like I half expected. The music tied everything together. Tschaikowsky's score is so familiar that I didn't think it could feel new to me, but hearing it performed with the dancing made it click in a different way. Certain moments hit harder than I anticipated, simply because the movement and the music lined up so naturally. By the end, what stayed with me most was the feeling of it all. It really did feel magical in a way that's hard to describe. There was a sense of warmth and wonder that made the time fly by, and I finally understood why the show means so much to so many people during the holidays. Walking out, I realized the production had completely exceeded my expectations. It felt welcoming, impressive, without being intimidated, and easy to enjoy, even as someone new to the ballet. I'd absolutely recommend it, especially for anyone who thinks it might not be for them.
Very nice. Now, I wasn't nearly as overwhelmed as Karen was. I was immediately disappointed that a ballet troupe with this great reputation used recorded music for the show. Maybe I should have expected it, as Karen said. Neither of us knew what to expect. I did enjoy the clever lighting and impressive staging, but the first half of the program was completely chaotic, and I did have a hard time following the storyline myself, much like those early critics. I absolutely loved how the children fit into the chaos, though, and they really did well. The second half settled the story down for me, and I was able to really enjoy the talented dancers. This included two young rising stars who just graduated from high school and now will attend Cleveland's Ballet Academy, twin daughters of a friend of mine. And I know my daughter enjoyed it immensely. It was her first time seeing it in Cleveland, but she had seen it at her local arts center a couple of times. Maybe we'll make it our new Christmas tradition as well.
And now, the conclusion of this very famous melody with a big finish.
conclusion of Waltz of the Flowers. And there you have all 6 sides from a great composer and the conductor who made the music famous. So thanks for tuning into Volume 251, a Cleveland Ballet Christmas Tradition, however you did. If you want more information about this show, head over to spinningmydadsvinyl.com. I'll be back tomorrow with all my skips, scratches, and pops for Volume 252, a Champagne Christmas. Until then, go with the flow, my friends.